Hello and welcome back. I am remaking my video on how to make an inlay of this design with this bit. In the first video I did not have the bit specifications and I just made a generic design without thinking much about the bit, and that is precisely how you create a CNC design that won't work right and then you have to start over, and here we are. Part of the problem is that this bit has a good size flat that is kind of wide relative to how narrow the spacings and gaps are on this design at the size it's supposed to be. So I made the design a little bigger, went from 9 to 10 inches tall, and this one is 5 by 6, and that gives me a minimum spacing of 0.044 inches in the gaps and spacings in the radius of the corners, which means that I cannot cut any deeper than 0.106 inches with this bit to cut this design, which means I can safely use 0.1 inch for my maximum depth of cut, and I can do a pocket toolpath and the bit will fit everywhere inside and outside and in the corners of this design. And the size of that flat doesn't give me much option to change this layout or this inlay thickness. The pink female can only be 0.1 inches deep, and the blue male can only be 0.1 inches tall. The glue gap is 0.02 inches top and bottom, so we have 0.08 inches of engagement, and the design plane is 0.02 inches deep in the female. And that's the level where the design looks like it's supposed to when we face off 0.02 inches off of the female. Above and below that point, the cut is not exactly the same shape as the design. And to hit that design plane, we set the start depth to that depth and the cut depth to whatever is left of our 0.1 total depth of cut. In the female, that will be 0.02 inches start depth and 0.08 inches cut depth for 0.1 total depth of cut. And on the male, from the top of the material to the design plane will be 0.06 inches, and that leaves 0.04 inches cut depth for a 0.1 inch total depth of cut. And when it's all said and done, we face off 0.02 inches off of the female and it will come out perfect. So let's jump into Vectric V-Carve Pro, and here we are in V-Carve Pro. I have imported the SVG file, and I'm going to do the male and female side by side in this one job for this video. The first thing we need to do is curve fit the vectors. And I'm going to use 3/10 of a thousandth because we barely have a thousandth to spare with that bit at that depth. And this will be the female because that's what the design is supposed to look like. And for the male, I have to create a mirror image copy. And move that over. And what I do here is I look at the size and I'll create a rectangle an inch larger. So I'm going to create a rectangle that is 6 by 7. And select them and center it. And the reason for the container is we want to pocket out around the outside of the design for the male, and for the female we will pocket inside the design. Some people like to offset to the outside to create the container, but here that only saves about 5 minutes of machine time, and you do have to cut out around the container to get rid of the high spots to use the male and glue it in the female. And it's much easier to cut a rectangle, and I prefer to work with a rectangle instead of this wonky shape. But that's neither here nor there, and it doesn't really matter which way you choose to do it. and I'm just going to use rectangle. And I'll do the female first, so I'll just select both shapes and do a pocket toolpath. And the female is to have 0.02 start depth and 0.08 cut depth. And my bit is an engraving tool, 7.5 degree side angle, 0.016 flat, 0.2 pass depth to cut my 0.1 total depth of cut in one pass. And the bottom of the pocket will not be visible, so I have 80 and 90 for step over. And for the clearance tool, I have a 1/8 end mill, same pass depth and everything, with a high step over because it won't be visible. And this is version 8.5. Any of the later versions, you'll be able to select multiple clearance tools, so it will look a little different here. And in a confined space, I like to use an offset and climb cutting, and everything else is personal preference. And I'll name this female and calculate and preview that. Now we'll do the male. Pocket start depth is 0.06 and cut depth is 0.04. Everything else is the same, except I would probably use raster 90 degrees to cut in the long direction, and do the profile pass last and name that male. Calculate, preview, and that's just an artifact of the high step over rate. And then you would cut this one out and glue them together. And the final step is to face off the female. So I'll copy me a rectangle over here and do a pocket toolpath, 0 start depth, 0.02 cut depth. And this will be visible, so I will reduce the step over, but I don't want repeating intervals like 1/4 and 1/2. So 27.5 and 55 will keep the two sides of the bit from cutting back over the exact same places. Call that face. Calculate, preview, and done. Of course, you would face off your whole project and not just a small rectangle. And the finished inlay should look exactly like the design. And that's all for now. Hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.